तत्र सूर्यभान्ति न चन्द्रतारकम् नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतो यमाग्नि तमेव भान्तम् अनुभाति सर्वं तस्य भाषा सर्वमिदं विभाति न तत्र सूर्यभान्ति न चन्द्रतारकम्
Place was enchanting place, Kurseong, surrounded by green hills with the snow on top.
Certainly I miss the beauty of the Himalayan hills, the snow-covered Kanchenjunga range of mountains and the fresh air.
Kurseong was certainly beautiful, but it did not seem to prepare people sufficiently for the mission of the end of the 20th century and the new century ahead of us.
You see, huge ships take time to turn.
But the ship did turn. Vidyajyoti, like a small boat tossing about in unsteady waters in Calcutta and Hazaribagh, grew from strength to strength in Asansol and Kurseong. After being in the hills for about a century, when this august institute began meditating a descent to the plains where the peoples are, it was indeed a huge ship demanding radical decisions and discerning visionaries. And at the helm of affairs was Father Pedro Arrupe.
Father Arrupe was the inspiration and the decision making that we should come to Delhi in spite of the beautiful and appropriate place Kurseong was for studies.
Arrupe had a very young mind, and I thought he was very true to the pedagogy of the incarnation. Gospel should be transcribed in terms of the new demands of the fast-changing world, slowly moving church, and society entering into the new phase after Father Jansen's and all.
It was Father Arrupe specifically who, after many years of consultation and meetings and dialogues and the things, he finally said, well, I take the responsibility. I make my decision of putting Kurseong in Delhi.
Father Arrupe had experienced the atomic explosion, but then he converted into implosion into society.
There was a provincials meeting in Bombay, and then the provincials proposed that at that time the novitiate in Mount St. Joseph, Bangalore was closed, so that building was laying empty. What about moving to Bangalore, Mount St. Joseph, all the facilities are there, and there is no expense, we can move in the very next year. That idea was accepted by all the provincials, and the provincial unanimously decided that next year we would shift St. Mary's to Bangalore. Then a surprising thing happened. Father General was present in the meeting, so he just sat down to the edge of the table and began to say, Fathers, are you sure that you are really discerning? You all made the decision to go to Bangalore. Are you really discerning? Is this the will of God? Therefore, if St. Mary's came to Delhi, you could say it was Arupa's decision.
In a letter to the community of St. Mary's, explaining the reasons for his decision to transfer the theologate to Delhi, Father Arupa wrote,
"The fundamental reason for the transfer to Delhi must be sought in the quest for an apt milieu for priestly and apostolic formation. The modern Jesuit must be a man who effectively lives the spirituality of the exercises and, like the Word, incarnates himself into this world of ours so as to lead it to God. To accomplish this salvific mission, he must acquire an empathetic knowledge of contemporary realities. It is my hope that a location in Delhi will help you and your successors to be exemplary Jesuits for your day."
The first establishment of the theologate in Hazaribagh and in Asansol, it was already an attempt at contextual theology, insofar as the theology of the missionaries had to be done in India. And the fact of having an Indian theologate was the first step of the missionary enterprise towards contextual theology.
In fact, this theology of mission had its humble beginnings in Calcutta in the year 1868. After 10 years, it was shifted to Hazaribagh with 8 scholastics and 2 priests. One of these priests was Father Penyaranda, who also taught Rabindranath Tagore in St. Xavier's, Calcutta. Years later, Tagore, referring to Father Penyaranda, would write,
"I cannot speak for other boys, but I felt in him the presence of a great soul, and even today the recollection of it seems to give me a passport into the silent seclusion of the temple of God."
In 1881, the institute was shifted from Hazaribagh to Asansol, and all this while the purpose was to train priests for the Bengal mission.
Transfer from Hazaribagh to Asansol, I think, was for the purpose of acquiring a better facilities for teaching and studying. The further transfer from Asansol to Kurseong was to provide for a more healthy study atmosphere for the missionaries who had come from Europe and found the heat of the plains quite unbearable, and many of them, in fact, did die in Asansol.
In 1887, the then superior of the Bengal mission, Father Grosjean, spearheaded the transfer of this institute to Kurseong. A property measuring 117 acres was bought from the Maharaja, and Father Grosjean, although he had no training in architecture, devised the plan for the building. The construction work was supervised by Father Koch and Brother Rosat. One has to agree that these 3 men, with no tools today's architects take for granted, erected a marvel with sheer hard work. a gift for precision and the passion to get it right. Finally, on 22nd January 1889, the entire institute was moved from Asansol to Kurseong under the guidance of Father Jules Brett, the rector, along with 5 professors, 18 students, books and cows and sheep, a great exodus event indeed. Not only was there a transfer of place, but also of patronage. St. Joseph's Asansol was now St. Mary's Kurseong, all in the family, of course.
Kurseong was a beauty, lying blissfully peaceful and happy in the lap of the Himalayas. It provided a perfect location for long hours of academic, spiritual, and physical training, so necessary for the hard mission awaiting the students. To the people of Kurseong, these white-robed men were absolute strangers, but they would soon become familiar figures on the horizon, teaching, learning, preaching, and healing. As soon as they settled down in Kurseong, St. Mary's made its presence felt among the local population by opening a boys' school with an orphanage attached. Soon a dispensary followed, and it was not too long before the local people recognized the good intentions of the priests at St. Mary's, leading to conversions.
Meanwhile, Father Grosjean, the untrained architect, would have enough reasons to smile. The building withstood an earthquake in 1897 and a cyclone in 1899. With the opening of the Sacred Heart College at Shembagnur, Tamil Nadu, the philosopher was shifted there, and so from 1898 onwards, St. Mary's was dedicated exclusively to the studies of theology. Father Cherian Koryakad was the first Indian professor, and Father Rai Cordero the first Indian rector.
Father C.M. Cherian was the Old Testament professor in Kurseong as well as here. In fact, he identified himself with the Old Testament very much, especially the prophets. The result that he was himself known as the prophet. His approach was spiritual, very adapted to the Indian way of looking at scriptures.
A milestone in the history of this institute was the founding of the Indian Academy in 1905 for studies in Indology. Father Joseph Woods, who came to St. Mary's in 1930, published My Mass, which helped the spread of the liturgical movement.
Joseph Woods, an eminent theologian, he was over 40 years the editor of Clergy Monthly and the former avatar of Vijayatiya. He came here, when we moved from Kurseong to Delhi, he was basically an inspirer of the community. He was already emeritus, he kept his distance. And also, it is not that he was not involved. He was involved, he knew everybody's name, in fact. But at the same time, he did not interfere in anything. He kept a dignified distance, and it was a dignified presence, which was nevertheless very formative, I would say.
Another feather in the intellectual cap of St. Mary's was Father Dupont's treatise on the Trinity, which is considered the first real theological work published in India. Besides, a number of regular publications such as The Light of the East Review and the Clergy Monthly were introduced. Clergy Monthly was later renamed as Vidyajyoti Journal of Theological Reflections. In 1969, St. Mary's became a common house, opening its doors to Jesuit students of theology from every province in the assistancy. The rector then was Father Herbie Alfonso of Bombay Province.
But the comfort of the mountains did not compensate for the great alienation from the national scene. And so, while the Bangladesh Liberation War was being waged in the early 70s, causing a great exodus of refugees, St. Mary's too began its second major exodus in its quest for greater involvement in the life and struggle of people.
In Kurseong, obviously the long stay there in the hills was very agreeable and in a sense very conducive to the study of theology. But it remained rather alienated from the main life of the country, because in the mountains there were few means of communication, and rarely prominent figures or intellectuals would come to the theologate to exchange views with the students or with the staff.
Once Delhi was chosen as the suitable place for the transfer, Father Zacharias, the then provincial of Patna, was appointed as the rector of St. Mary's to facilitate the transfer.
Where to find a place in Delhi? Somebody suggested, what about St. Saviour's hostel buildings? General got upset. Yes. Then what about the inner place? And the very evening, he told me, since I was a provincial of Patna at that time, let us go to Delhi and see the places. So he flew with me from Bombay to Delhi, and he walked around all the buildings. And when we went to the residence, he himself measured, with his feet. This is this long, this is this broad. We can build the theologate here. Now they can stay there. And then that was a decision. The chief difficulty we had in transferring the whole thing was, first, as far as material goes, St. Mary's had a very big library. Up to St. Mary's, on that road, trucks could not go, only small trucks could go only. And secondly, it was time of the war, Pakistan war, in Bangladesh war was going on. And therefore, any trucks going along the main road were taken by the government. So therefore, we could bring small trucks, the books which were created, up to Siliguri. And then from Siliguri, it was difficult to get any truck because the government was taking away all the trucks they could. The war was very close there. So we had a real difficulty to get to transport the things. First is cutting all the trees, getting plants, getting big boxes, creating the books, and also therefore several trucks of boxes for books plus 2-3 railway carriages that we transported.
We began our theology here in Delhi in 1972. By the time Father Rupe had already written letters on the social apostolate, on importance of commitment to the poor, and then there was the General Congregation in 72 that redefined our mission as a service of faith and the promotion of justice.
Vidya Jyoti tried to enter into Delhi, the slums of Delhi. Then, of course, initiated a lot of interaction with some of the intellectual centers, the Center for Developing Society. I recall 2 seminars in which professors of Delhi University, JNU and the centers were involved. Therefore, on the one hand, ground level, the slum, the resettlement colony, the action groups, the people's movement, etc., to be part of one wing. At the same time, to be in touch with the intellectual development centers of our country, also, it is at this time that we are dragged into the deep into society when our Sikh brethren was slaughtered following the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and Vidya Jyoti closed down for a week, and we were in all the refugee camps in Delhi, and number of camps were run by the Vidya Jyoti. The officers handed over to us, A large number of people from various people movement came for reflection over this one. I remember many of these outstanding people coming to Vidya Jyoti, why and what this event as such. Yeah, therefore it was a very important time for Vidya Jyoti. To add to this, we had the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians session in Delhi, and the founder President Gutierrez and others were in Delhi. So we had invited them to come and contribute to this whirlpool that is actually sort of vibrating and all. Therefore, I think when we go back, a lot of quite interesting events through which we try to enter into Delhi.
The big shift we began to register in Delhi is that while we continued with this Vatican II orientations, the reality of Delhi put us in touch with the reality of India. A new approach was the reality of the poor, the marginalized, the Dalits, tribals, women. That also came to occupy center stage in our concern for theology.
As soon as the new institute began functioning in Delhi, it was named as Vidya Jyoti Institute of Religious Studies. It then had 63 students and 15 professors. Father Samuel Ryan was its first dean in Delhi. Today, it is called Vidya Jyoti College of Theology.
Well, certainly when we were in Kurseong, only the fourth year priests went for any ministry, and that too only on weekends. A few of us went to some schools to take moral science classes. Otherwise, there was hardly any contact with the people of God. Now, when we came here, of course, there was no revolutionary change, but it was left to the initiative and the freedom and the responsibility of the students to get involved in the lives of the people. It is only gradually that field work became not an optional but an essential part of doing theology. The more we get involved in the lives of the people, we ourselves realize that it is not enough to do armchair theology, but together with serious research and study, we must also enter the lives of the people so that their questions, their problems become our questions and our problems.
ईश्वर